What would you do if a single act of kindness changed your entire life forever? When struggling single father Jack Morrison brought a rain-soaked stranger into his home on a cold October night, he never imagined she was the runaway daughter of one of America's wealthiest men, or that her father would stop at nothing to destroy anyone who stood between them. The rain fell like cold needles against Jack Morrison's face as he trudged down Maple Street, his work boots splashing through puddles that reflected the dying glow of streetlights. It was nearly midnight, and Cedar Falls, a town small enough that everyone knew your business, but not small enough to actually care, had rolled up its sidewalks hours ago. The only sounds were the rhythmic patter of rain and the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement from the highway a mile away. Jack pulled his reflective safety jacket tighter, though it did little against the October chill that had settled over northern Minnesota. His bones ached with the particular exhaustion that comes from 12-hour shifts loading freight at the distribution center, the kind of tired that sleep never quite cured because you knew you'd be doing it all again in less than 10 hours. He was thinking about Emma, as he always did during these long walks home. His 7-year-old daughter would be asleep by now, curled up under the patchwork quilt his mother had made before she passed. Margaret O'Brien from next door would be dozing in the armchair, the television's blue glow flickering across her kind, weathered face. He'd have to wake her gently, press $20 into her hand despite her protests, and thank her again for watching Emma while he worked nights. $20 he couldn't afford, but what choice did he have? Jack was so lost in mental calculations, rent due in 5 days, electricity bill already 2 weeks late, Emma needing new shoes before winter really hit, that he almost missed her. Almost. But there's something about human suffering that catches the eye even when you're drowning in your own. Maybe it's instinct. Or maybe it's just that people like Jack, who knew what rock bottom felt like, developed a radar for others teetering on that same edge. She was huddled under the awning of Murphy's Hardware, which had been closed since 6. The streetlight above cast her in harsh shadows, but Jack could see enough. A young woman, maybe early 20s, soaked to the bone despite the inadequate shelter. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She wore jeans and a thin jacket that might have been expensive once, but now just looked pathetic against the rain. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and she was shaking. Whether from cold or something else, Jack couldn't tell. Most people would have walked past. Cedar Falls wasn't big enough to have a serious homeless problem, but it wasn't small enough to be immune to human tragedy either. You learned to look away, to tell yourself it wasn't your problem, that you had enough troubles of your own. Jack stopped walking. He stood there for a long moment, rain dripping from his jacket, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, while some internal debate played out. He thought of Emma, of the $20 in his wallet that was already spoken for. He thought of the last time he'd tried to help someone, his ex-wife's cousin, who'd stolen Emma's birthday money and disappeared. He thought of every responsible reason to keep walking. Then he thought of his mother, who used to say that kindness wasn't about having enough to share, it was about sharing even when you didn't. Jack's voice came out rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken all shift. "Hey, you okay?" The woman's head jerked up, and for a split second, Jack saw pure terror in her eyes, the look of a cornered animal. Then she seemed to force herself into stillness, her face going carefully blank. Even in the dim light, even with rain and exhaustion obscuring details, Jack could see she was pretty. But it was the kind of pretty that had been beaten down by something. Her features were sharp with hunger or fear, or both. Her voice barely carried over the rain. "I'm fine. Just waiting for someone." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Nobody waited for anyone at midnight under Murphy's awning. Not in Cedar Falls, not in this weather. Jack should have nodded and walked away. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing. Instead, he heard himself say something else. "There's a diner about 2 miles that way. Stays open till 2. They've got coffee." Her voice came sharper now, with an edge that suggested she'd had practice shutting people down. "I said I'm fine. I don't need anything." Jack shifted his weight, aware of how he must look. A tall, broad-shouldered man in work clothes approaching a vulnerable woman alone at night. He took a step back, hands visible. "Okay. I'm just heading home. Live about 3 blocks that way." He gestured vaguely east. "If you change your mind about that diner, or if you need, I don't know, a phone to call someone, or just to get out of the rain for a minute." He trailed off, feeling foolish. What was he doing? He had nothing to offer. His house was barely more than a shack held together by determination and duct tape. He was nobody, just another tired man in a town full of them, trying to keep his head above water and failing more often than not. The woman stared at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She was looking at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle, to figure out what angle he was working, what he wanted from her. "Why?" Her question cut through the rain. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Jack shrugged, suddenly aware of how bone-deep tired he was. "Guess I know what it's like to be stuck in the rain with nowhere to go. Doesn't feel good." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or recognition. For a moment, her carefully constructed walls seemed to crack, and Jack saw the scared girl underneath the defensive exterior. Then she looked away. "You should go home. I'm sure someone's waiting for you. My daughter's asleep, and the neighbor who watches her is probably snoring in my armchair." Jack surprised himself with the confession. He didn't usually talk about his life to strangers. "Look, I'm not trying to be a hero or anything. I'm just saying it's cold. You're wet, and I've got a couch and a roof that doesn't leak much. One night. The couch, some dry clothes if you want them, and I'll mind my own business. In the morning, you can leave whenever you want. No questions, no judgment, no strings." She studied him for another long moment, and Jack could see her wavering, could see the exhaustion and desperation she was trying so hard to hide. He also saw something else, a deep, bone-deep weariness that came from being hurt too many times. "Why would you trust me? I could rob you. I could be dangerous." Jack almost laughed, but it would have sounded bitter. "Lady, I've got nothing worth stealing. The TV's from 2010. There's maybe $40 in the whole house. And the most valuable thing I own is a used Honda that breaks down twice a month. You're welcome to any of it if it helps." It was the truth, delivered without self-pity or anger, just fact. And maybe that's what got through to her, because after another long moment of silence, she slowly unfolded herself from under the awning. She was taller than he'd expected, but so thin that her clothes hung on her frame. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled. "One night," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "And I leave in the morning." "Deal." They walked through the rain in silence, Jack keeping a respectful distance. He caught her glancing at him sideways, still wary, still ready to run. He didn't blame her. The world taught women to be afraid of men, especially men offering help. The fact that she was willing to take the risk told him just how desperate she must be. Cedar Falls at midnight was a ghost town. They passed the closed pharmacy, the dark windows of the dollar store, the shuttered cafe where Jack sometimes splurged on coffee when payday landed just right. Their footsteps echoed off the empty buildings, and the rain had settled into a steady drumbeat that seemed like it might never stop. "What's your name?" The question came suddenly, breaking the rhythm of their walking. Jack Morrison." She nodded, but didn't offer her own name in return. Jack didn't push. His house appeared after 3 blocks, a small, weathered structure that had seen better days sometime around 1975. The porch sagged on one side, the paint was peeling, and one of the shutters hung at an angle, but the lights were on inside, warm and yellow against the darkness. "It's not much," Jack said, suddenly embarrassed. He was about to bring this stranger, this girl who, despite her circumstances, had an air of refinement he couldn't quite place, into his shabby little house with its thrift store furniture and patched walls. "It's perfect." Something in her voice made him look at her sharply, but her face was turned away, hidden in shadow. The door wasn't locked. Jack had stopped locking it years ago, partly because there was nothing to steal, and partly because the lock was broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. They stepped into the small living room, and sure enough, Margaret O'Brien was asleep in the armchair, her reading glasses slipping down her nose, Wheel of Fortune playing quietly on the TV. Jack touched her shoulder gently. "Margaret?" The old woman startled awake, then smiled when she saw him. Her smile faltered slightly when she noticed the soaked stranger standing in the doorway, but her manners were too good to show disapproval. "Jack, dear, Emma was an angel as always, asleep since 8:30. Margaret gathered her purse, eyeing the young woman with poorly concealed curiosity. "I made some stew. It's on the stove if you're hungry." "You're a lifesaver, Margaret." Jack pressed a 20 into her hand, waving away her protests. "Please, I insist." After Margaret left with a final curious glance at their guest, Jack closed the door and turned to find the woman standing frozen in the middle of his living room, dripping water onto the worn carpet. She was looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read, not disgust, not pity, but something more complex. "Bathroom's down the hall. There's towels in the closet. They're clean, just old. I can find some dry clothes if you want. They'll be too big, but—" "Why are you doing this?" she interrupted, turning to face him. Her eyes were searching his face again, like she was looking for the catch, the hidden agenda. "Really? Why?" Jack was too tired for anything but honesty. "Because a long time ago, my wife left me with a baby and about $300 to my name. I was sleeping in my car, trying to figure out how to keep my daughter fed, when a stranger, a guy who worked at the gas station, offered to let me crash on his couch for a week. No questions asked." He paused, remembering. "That week gave me enough breathing room to find this place, to get the job at the distribution center. I never got to pay him back. He moved away before I could. So I guess I figure maybe this is how you pay it forward. Maybe that's all any of us can do." The woman's eyes were bright, and Jack realized with alarm that she was fighting tears. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Elena." She said it after a moment, like she was testing the weight of it. "My name is Elena." "Okay, Elena. Let's get you dry." 20 minutes later, Elena emerged from the bathroom wearing a pair of Jack's old sweatpants and a Minnesota Twins t-shirt that hung to her knees. Her hair was still damp but no longer dripping, and some color had returned to her face. Jack had set out blankets on the sagging couch along with a pillow that had seen better days. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry," he said, keeping his distance, aware of how small the house was and how that might make her uncomfortable. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. It's not much, but—" "Thank you." Her voice cracked slightly on the words. "Thank you, Jack." He nodded, suddenly awkward. "My daughter's room is right there." He pointed to the first door down the hall. "So if you need anything, just knock on my door, second one. I'm a light sleeper." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Jack wanted to ask the questions crowding his mind: where she'd come from, what she was running from, whether she had family who was worried. But he'd promised no questions, and he meant it. "Good night, Elena." "Good night." Jack retreated to his room, closing the door quietly. Through the thin walls, he could hear the soft sounds of Elena moving around the living room, then nothing. He lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering what he'd just done, wondering if Emma would be safe with a stranger in the house, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or done the only decent thing he could. He must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing he knew, early morning light was filtering through the threadbare curtains, and someone was screaming. Jack bolted out of bed, his heart hammering, and threw open his door. Emma stood in the hallway in her rainbow pajamas, her eyes wide with shock. Elena was sitting up on the couch, looking equally startled, the blankets tangled around her legs. Emma's voice came out as a shriek that probably woke the entire neighborhood. "Daddy, there's a princess on our couch!" The absurdity of it, the pure, innocent wonder in his daughter's voice, broke through Jack's panic. He found himself laughing, the tension draining from his shoulders as he scooped Emma into his arms. "That's not a princess, sweetheart. That's Elena. She's a friend who needed a place to stay last night." Emma studied Elena with the serious intensity only a 7-year-old could muster. "She looks like a princess. She's got long hair and everything." Elena, who had looked terrified a moment ago, was staring at Emma with an expression of pure wonder. Then, slowly, she smiled. A real smile, not the careful, guarded expression she'd worn the night before. It transformed her face, made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm not a princess, but thank you. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever called me." Emma wiggled out of Jack's arms and approached the couch with the fearlessness of a child who'd never learned to mistrust strangers. "Are you staying for breakfast? Daddy makes pancakes on Sunday mornings. The kind of burnt, but they're good if you put enough syrup on them." "Emma," Jack warned, embarrassed. "Elena was just leaving." "Actually," Elena interrupted, her eyes still on Emma. "Burnt pancakes sound perfect. If that's okay." Jack looked between his daughter, bouncing with excitement, and this mysterious woman who'd materialized out of the rain. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was a bad idea, that he should let her leave, should go back to his simple, struggling life without complications. But there was something in Elena's eyes, a desperate hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was the look of someone who'd been alone for so long that even burnt pancakes with a stranger felt like salvation. "Okay, pancakes it is." The kitchen was tiny, barely big enough for 2 people to move around comfortably, but somehow the 3 of them made it work. Emma chattered non-stop, asking Elena a million questions with the boundless curiosity of childhood. Where did she come from? Did she have any pets? What was her favorite color? Did she like unicorns? Elena answered patiently, carefully, revealing almost nothing of substance, but engaging with Emma's enthusiasm in a way that made Jack's chest ache. He watched them while he mixed batter, store-brand pancake mix because that's what he could afford, and tried to figure out who this woman really was. She had an accent he couldn't quite place, not Southern or Midwestern, but something more refined, educated. The way she held herself, even in borrowed sweatpants, suggested someone used to better circumstances. But then there were the bruises he'd noticed on her wrists when she pushed up the sleeves to help Emma set the table. Fading but visible, in the shape of fingerprints. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. No questions. That was the deal.
"Daddy, the pancakes are smoking,"
Emma announced helpfully. Right, sorry. Jack flipped them quickly, revealing their characteristic burnt edges. See? Perfectly imperfect. Elena laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that both Jack and Emma stopped to stare at her. She clapped a hand over her mouth, looking embarrassed.
"Sorry, I can't remember the last time I had burnt pancakes. Or any pancakes, really."
Where do you live that they don't have pancakes? Emma asked, scandalized. Emma, honey, maybe we should, Jack started.
"It's okay."
Elena knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level.
"I've been living in a place where everything was perfect all the time."
Perfect food, perfect clothes, perfect everything. And you know what? Perfect is really, really boring. It makes you forget what real things taste like. Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. That sounds sad. It was, but I think I'm done with perfect now. They ate breakfast at the rickety kitchen table, Jack, Emma, and Elena, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The pancakes were indeed burnt on the edges and gummy in the middle. The syrup was the cheap kind from the dollar store, and they drank water because Jack had forgotten to buy milk. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it was perfect. Elena ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the finest meal she'd ever had. She listened to Emma's rambling stories about school and her best friend Maya and the stray cat that lived behind the convenience store. She laughed at Emma's jokes and asked follow-up questions and seemed genuinely interested in the life of a 7-year-old in Cedar Falls, Minnesota. And Jack found himself relaxing, letting down the guard he usually kept up around strangers. There was something about Elena, beneath the obvious fear and exhaustion, that felt trustworthy, genuine. Like maybe, despite all evidence to the contrary, she was exactly who she appeared to be. Just someone who needed help. After breakfast, Emma insisted on showing Elena her room.
"It's small, but I have a good view of the tree."
While they were gone, Jack cleaned up the kitchen. Through the wall, he could hear his daughter's excited voice and Elena's softer responses, punctuated by occasional laughter. He was drying the last plate when Elena appeared in the doorway. She changed back into her own clothes, still damp but wearable, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. The borrowed clothes were folded neatly over her arm.
"I should go. I've imposed enough. Thank you for everything."
Where will you go? The question was out before Jack could stop himself. Elena's face shuddered.
"I'll figure something out. I always do."
Elena. Jack set down the dish towel, choosing his words carefully. Look, I know I said no questions, and I meant it. But if you need, Cedar Falls isn't big, but there are resources. The church runs a shelter, and there's...
"I can't go to a shelter."
Her voice was sharp, almost panicked.
"I can't. There are people looking for me. If I use my name anywhere, if I show up on any official registry..."
She stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. Jack's mind was racing. People looking for her, running from something official. Those bruises on her wrists. Are you in trouble? Like legal trouble?
"No, nothing like that. I didn't do anything wrong.
Elena's hands twisted together.
I just need to disappear for a while. To figure things out."
This was the moment where Jack should have shown her the door, should have protected his daughter from whatever mess this woman had brought to his doorstep. It was the responsible thing, the smart thing. Instead, he said something else entirely. "The laundromat down on 3rd Street is hiring. My buddy Carl runs it. He pays cash, doesn't ask too many questions. If you need a few days to get on your feet. Elena stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you? You don't even know me. I know you made my daughter laugh at breakfast. I know you washed your dishes without being asked. I know you're scared and running from something. And Jack paused, surprised by his own conviction. And I know what it's like to need a second chance. So if you want it, the offer's there. For a long moment, Elena just looked at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Jack could see her fighting some internal battle, pride against need, fear against hope.
I don't have anywhere else to go, she finally whispered. I've been sleeping in bus stations and under bridges for 2 weeks. I have $43 and a credit card I can't use because they'll trace it. I'm so tired. And I'm so scared. And I don't know what to do. The confession seemed to break something in her. Her shoulders slumped, the last of her defenses crumbling. And suddenly, she wasn't a mysterious stranger anymore. She was just a frightened girl who needed help. Okay, then here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay on the couch for a few more nights, a week maybe, until you get a couple paychecks from Carl. No arguments, he added when Elena opened her mouth to protest. Emma already loves you, and honestly, it'll be nice to have another adult around. The house gets lonely. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. Emma appeared from her room, having clearly been eavesdropping. Can Elena stay, Daddy, please? She said she'd teach me how to braid hair. Jack raised an eyebrow at Elena, who had the grace to look embarrassed. I may have promised some hair tutorials. Then I guess she's staying, at least until you learn all her secrets. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Jack worked his night shifts, came home exhausted, and found Elena and Emma laughing over breakfast. Elena started work at Carl's Wash and Fold, coming home with red, chapped hands and stories about the regulars. She insisted on contributing to groceries, pooling her cash wages with Jack's paycheck, and suddenly they could afford things like fresh vegetables and real coffee instead of the instant kind. This is too much, Jack protested when Elena came home with a bag full of actual groceries, chicken breasts, fresh broccoli, a gallon of milk, a box of real butter. It's not too much, it's fair. Elena was unloading the bags, organizing the fridge with an efficiency that suggested she'd never done it before, but was determined to get it right. You gave me a place to stay. The least I can do is help feed us. Emma thrived with Elena around. The little girl had been starved for female attention. Jack did his best, but he was just one person, working impossible hours, trying to be both mother and father. Elena filled a gap he hadn't even realized was there. She braided Emma's hair before school, helped with homework at the kitchen table, listened to endless stories about playground politics and the mysterious ways of second-grade boys. And Jack found himself looking forward to coming home. It had been just him and Emma for so long, ever since Jessica left when Emma was 6 months old, chasing some dream of a bigger life that apparently didn't include a husband and baby. He'd built walls around his heart, focused entirely on keeping his daughter safe and fed and happy. He didn't have time for friends, for relationships, for anything that wasn't work and Emma. But Elena was different. She wasn't asking for anything, wasn't expecting anything. She was just there, making coffee in the morning, leaving little notes stuck to the fridge, humming while she folded laundry. The house felt warmer with her in it, more like a home and less like a survival bunker. One evening at dinner, spaghetti with actual meat sauce, another Elena contribution, Emma announced something that made Jack's heart clench. "Daddy's happy now. He smiles more." Jack felt his face heat. "I smile plenty." "Not like this." Emma gestured vaguely at his face. "This is different. This is like inside happy, not just outside happy." Elena was studying her plate intently, but Jack could see the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "Well, I guess having another person to talk to helps. Gets lonely, just the two of us sometimes." "I'm not boring," Emma protested.
Never said you were, kiddo. You're the least boring person I know. But that night, after Emma was in bed, Jack found himself sitting on the porch, a luxury he usually couldn't afford in October, but the rain had stopped and the night was unusually warm. Elena joined him without asking, 2 cups of tea in her hands. "Where'd the tea come from?" Jack asked, accepting his cup. "I bought it. Hope that's okay. I thought, I don't know, it seemed like something we could use. Something nice." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea that was probably fancier than anything Jack had ever tasted. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic from the highway and Margaret's TV through her window. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. "Sure." "Why did your wife leave?" Jack had been expecting the question eventually. "She was young. We both were. Got married too fast, had Emma too soon. When reality hit, the bills, the diapers, the crying at 3 a.m., she realized it wasn't what she wanted. Or I wasn't what she wanted. Hard to say. That must have been hard." "It was. Still is sometimes. But I've got Emma, and that's everything." He glanced at Elena. "What about you? What are you running from?" He hadn't meant to ask, but sitting there in the dark with tea warming his hands and Elena beside him, it felt natural, safe. Elena was quiet for so long that Jack thought she wouldn't answer. Then her voice came, soft, almost dreamy. "Expectations. Control. A life that looked perfect, but felt like a prison." She paused. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just him and me and his empire, his legacy, his plans for my future." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to have your entire life mapped out before you're old enough to understand what you're losing?" Jack thought about his own life, the constant struggle, the uncertainty, never knowing if he'd make rent. "Can't say I do." Sounds suffocating, though. It was. Is. I don't know. Elena set down her tea, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's probably looking for me. Probably hired people. I shouldn't stay here much longer. I'm putting you and Emma at risk." "What would happen if he found you?" "He'd take me back. Make me go back to being the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress, the perfect puppet. And I'd rather live under a bridge for the rest of my life than go back to that." The vehemence in her voice startled Jack. He'd seen people desperate before. He'd been desperate himself. But this was something different. This was someone who'd tasted freedom and would do anything not to lose it again. "Then don't. Don't go back." "It's not that easy." "Why not?" Elena laughed, the sound hollow. "Because he's Richard Castellano. Because he owns half the companies in this state. Because when Richard Castellano wants something, he gets it. Always." The name meant nothing to Jack, but the fear in Elena's voice told him everything he needed to know. "You're safe here. As safe as anywhere, anyway. Cedar Falls is small enough that strangers stand out, but too boring for anyone to really pay attention. If you need more time, take it. I can't keep taking advantage of your kindness. It's not taking advantage if I'm offering. Jack finished his tea, the cup empty but still warm in his hands. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand your world. I don't. But I understand running, and I understand fear, and I understand what it means to need a safe place to catch your breath. So stay. Stay as long as you need to. Elena turned to look at him, and in the dim porch light, her eyes were luminous. Why are you so kind? I'm not. I'm just doing what someone once did for me. That's all. But even as he said it, Jack knew it wasn't quite true, because somewhere in the past few days, Elena had stopped being just a stranger he was helping. She'd become part of their little household, part of their family, and the thought of her leaving, of the house going back to being just him and Emma, made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. He was falling for her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They sat together in the darkness, two people from completely different worlds, connected by circumstances and kindness and something else, something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. Inside, through the window, they could see Emma's nightlight glowing softly in her room, a child sleeping safely, unaware of the complicated adult world swirling around her. And for that moment at least, everything was perfect, even if they both knew it couldn't last. They sat in silence for another few minutes, the October air crisp but not yet bitter. Then Elena moved closer, tentative, and Jack felt his breath catch. Her hand found his, cool fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. Jack, I know. This is complicated. I know that too. But when she leaned in, when her lips met his in a kiss that tasted like tea and rain and possibility, none of the complications mattered. Jack pulled her closer, one hand cupping her face, and Elena's fingers twisted in his shirt. The kiss deepened, desperate and sweet and real, the kind of kiss that changes everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his chest. Jack could feel his heart hammering, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. We should probably talk about this, Jack managed. Probably. Later. They sat there, wrapped around each other, stealing kisses between whispered conversations. They talked about everything, fears and hopes, and all the impossible dreams that seemed slightly less impossible when spoken aloud in the darkness. Neither of them noticed the dark sedan that had parked across the street 3 days ago. Neither of them saw the man inside with the telephoto lens, documenting everything. Robert Sharp had been patient, thorough, and now he had what Richard Castellano had paid him to find: proof of Elena's location and evidence of her new attachments. Sharp typed out a message on his phone. Found her, Cedar Falls, Minnesota. Staying with warehouse worker named Jack Morrison. Appears to be involved. Sending photos. Instructions? The response came within seconds. Do not approach. Continue surveillance. I'll arrive tomorrow morning. Sharp settled back in his seat, camera ready. This Morrison guy had no idea what was coming. Neither did the girl. Sharp had been doing this job long enough to know how these stories ended. The rich always got what they wanted, and people like Jack Morrison always got crushed in the process. It was just business, nothing personal. But as he watched them through his lens, watched the way they held each other like they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will, Sharp felt something unexpected. Not quite pity. He'd been in this business too long for that. But maybe a flicker of regret for what was about to be destroyed. By morning, Richard Castellano would be in Cedar Falls, and everything Jack Morrison thought he was building would come crashing down. The morning came too soon, dragging Jack from a restless sleep filled with dreams he couldn't quite remember but left him feeling hollow. He woke to the sound of car doors closing, expensive, solid thuds that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Through his bedroom window, he could see them. 2 black sedans gleaming in the weak October sunlight like predators who'd finally cornered their prey. Standing beside the first vehicle was a man who could only be Richard Castellano. Tall, imposing, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Jack made in 6 months. His hair was silver gray, perfectly styled, and even from this distance, Jack could see the cold authority in his posture. This was a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted when he wanted it, without question or delay. Jack pulled on jeans and a shirt, his hands moving automatically while his mind raced. Elena was still asleep on the couch. He could hear her breathing through the thin walls. Emma would be up soon, expecting pancakes and laughter and the warmth that had filled their home for the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Had it really only been 6 weeks since that rainy night? It felt like Elena had always been there, like the 3 of them had always been a family. But families built on borrowed time and other people's mercy didn't last. Jack had always known that. The knock came sharp and authoritative, 3 precise raps that demanded immediate response. Jack glanced toward the living room, saw Elena sitting up on the couch, her face drained of color. Their eyes met across the small space, and in that look, Jack saw everything they were about to lose. He opened the door. Richard Castellano stood on Jack's sagging porch like a king surveying conquered territory. His eyes swept over Jack with the kind of assessment wealthy men gave to things they considered beneath them. Quick, dismissive, already forming judgments. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Richard Castellano. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jack's jaw tightened at the phrasing. Something, not someone. "Elena belongs to herself, Mr. Castellano." A thin smile touched Richard's lips, cold as Minnesota winter. "Legally, she's still listed as a dependent in my household. Her affairs are managed through family trusts. But I'm not here to argue semantics with you. I'm here to collect my daughter and return her to her proper place." Elena appeared beside Jack, still wearing his old t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair uncombed, looking nothing like the polished heiress her father probably remembered. Jack felt her hand find his, her fingers cold and trembling. Richard's expression flickered when he saw her, surprise, pain, something almost like grief, before the mask of control slammed back into place. "Elena, you look different." Her voice came steady, stronger than Jack expected. "I am different." "So I see. Living in poverty with a man you barely know. Very mature. Very well thought out." The condescension in his tone made Jack's free hand curl into a fist, but Elena squeezed his other hand gently. A warning, or maybe just a plea for patience. "I'm sorry your image took a hit. That must have been terrible for you." Richard's eyes narrowed at the sarcasm. "Get your things. We're leaving now." "No." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Richard Castellano was clearly not accustomed to being told no. His face darkened, and Jack could see the anger he usually kept so carefully contained beginning to surface. "I beg your pardon?" Elena's voice grew stronger. "I said no. I'm not going with you." Elena, don't be ridiculous. You've had your little adventure, made your point, whatever this was about. Now it's time to come home and be sensible. This isn't an adventure. This is my life. The life I chose. Richard's laugh was sharp, humorless. Chose? You think you've chosen this? He gestured at the house, at Jack, with barely concealed contempt. You think love lives in a shack with burnt toast and poverty? You think this man can give you anything worth having? Jack felt Elena stiffen beside him, saw her hands clench. But before she could respond, Richard continued, his voice dropping into something more dangerous. I've given you everything. The best education, the best opportunities, a position in one of the most successful companies in the country. And you threw it away for what? For this? You gave me a cage, a beautiful, expensive cage, but I'd rather be free and poor than rich and trapped. Free? Richard's voice dripped with disdain. You think working in a laundromat is freedom? You think struggling to pay bills and wondering where your next meal comes from is freedom? You're delusional. Emma appeared in the hallway behind them, drawn by the raised voices. She stood there in her rainbow pajamas, eyes wide with fear, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Jack's heart twisted at the sight of his daughter's scared face, at the way she looked between the adults, trying to understand what was happening. Maybe I am. Elena's voice shook but held firm. But I'm happy. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. You're in shock. You're confused. This isn't real, Elena. It's a fantasy. And when reality sets in, when the novelty wears off, and you're left with nothing but struggle and disappointment, you'll realize what a mistake you've made. The only mistake I made was taking this long to leave. Richard's control finally snapped. Enough! I've been patient, I've been understanding, but this ends now. You will get in that car, or I will make your friend here regret the day he decided to harbor a runaway. Jack stepped forward, his body moving between Elena and her father. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Richard turned his cold gaze fully on Jack for the first time. I can have you fired with one phone call. I can make sure you never work in this state again. I can open investigations into your fitness as a parent. I'm sure Child Services would be very interested to know you've been housing an unrelated young woman, exposing your daughter to who knows what kind of instability. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. He glanced back at Emma, saw her small body pressed against the wall, tears starting to track down her cheeks. Everything he'd built, everything he'd fought for. Richard Castellano could destroy it all with a phone call. And they both knew it. You wouldn't. Elena's voice had gone hollow with shock. Try me. I've spent 6 weeks searching for you, Elena. 6 weeks of worry and frustration and dealing with your absence. I'm done playing games. You will come home, or everyone in this pathetic little house will pay the price. The silence stretched taut as wire. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Elena trembling beside him, could see his daughter's world crumbling in real time. He was doing the math, the terrible calculation every parent makes, what he'd sacrifice to keep Emma safe. Elena must have been doing the same math, because when she spoke again, her voice had gone flat, defeated. Okay. I'll go. Elena, no, Jack started. I'll go, but I have conditions. Richard raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Nevertheless, Elena straightened, and Jack saw her pull on the armor she must have worn in boardrooms, channeling whatever strength she'd inherited from this man.
I'll come home. I'll meet with Marcus Ashford. I'll even consider the marriage you want. But you leave Jack and Emma alone. Completely alone. No phone calls to his employer, no investigations, no interference in their lives whatsoever. They were helping someone they thought was in trouble. That's all. They don't deserve punishment for basic human kindness. Richard studied her, and Jack could see him calculating, weighing options like a businessman evaluating a deal. And if I agree? Then I'll get in that car right now. But if I ever find out you've gone back on your word, if you hurt them in any way, I will disappear again. And next time, you'll never find me. It was a bluff. They all knew it. But Richard Castellano was a businessman first, and he understood the value of a deal that gave him most of what he wanted. Very well. Your friends remain untouched. Now get your things. Elena turned back to Jack and Emma. Jack saw her face crumple for just a moment before she forced it back into composure. She went to Emma first, kneeling down so she was eye level with the little girl. I have to go, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Emma's voice broke on a sob. But you said you'd stay as long as you could. And I did. I stayed as long as I possibly could. Elena pulled Emma into a fierce hug, her own tears flowing freely now. You are the most amazing little girl I've ever met. Smart and funny and so incredibly kind. Don't ever let anyone make you hard, okay? Don't ever let the world take that away from you. I don't want you to go. Please don't go. Please. Jack gently pulled Emma away, gathering her into his arms even as his own eyes stayed locked on Elena. The pain in them was unbearable. Grief and rage and helplessness all mixed together. Elena stood facing him. Her hand reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing his jaw like she was trying to memorize the feeling. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. She couldn't finish. There were too many words, and none of them were adequate. Jack's voice came rough, barely controlled. This isn't over. I'll find a way. Don't make promises neither of us can keep. Just remember me. Remember that what we had was real. She kissed him then, not caring that her father was watching, that Emma was crying, that the investigator was probably still taking photos. She kissed him like it was the last thing she'd ever do, pouring every ounce of love and regret and desperate hope into that single moment. When she pulled away, Jack whispered the only truth that mattered. I love you. I love you too. Both of you. Always. Elena forced herself to turn, to walk away from them, to follow her father to the waiting car. She didn't look back, couldn't look back, because if she did, she'd break completely. She'd run back to that house and refuse to leave, consequences be damned. The car door closed with a soft, expensive thunk. The leather seats were butter soft, the interior climate-controlled and perfect. It smelled like money and power and everything she'd been running from. Through the tinted window, she watched Jack standing on his sagging porch, Emma in his arms, both of them watching her leave. She watched until the car turned the corner and they disappeared from view. Only then did she finally let herself shatter. Richard sat beside her in silence for several miles before speaking. You'll thank me for this eventually, when you've had time to think clearly. Elena didn't answer. She was thinking about burnt pancakes and blistered hands and a 7-year-old calling her mama in her sleep. She was thinking about how wealth and power felt hollow compared to sitting on a cheap couch watching Disney movies.
The wedding is scheduled for December. Marcus is looking forward to it. He's quite taken with you." Elena turned to look at her father, really look at him. She saw the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the expensive clothes that couldn't quite hide how tired he looked. And for the first time, she saw him clearly, not as an all-powerful tyrant, but as a man who'd lost his wife and didn't know how to love the daughter he had left. So he controlled her instead. "I'll never forgive you for this." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. But his voice was steady when he replied, "I can live with that, as long as you're safe." "I was safe. I was happy." "You were living in squalor with strangers." "I was living with people who cared about me. Really cared. Not because of my name or my connections or what I could do for them,
Just because I existed. When's the last time you cared about me like that, Father?" Richard had no answer. They drove in silence back toward Minneapolis, back toward the penthouse and the life Elena had tried so hard to escape. With every mile, she felt pieces of herself being stripped away. The woman who'd worked at the laundromat, who'd braided a little girl's hair, who'd fallen asleep in a man's arms on a worn-out couch. By the time they reached the city, Elena Castellano, heiress, daughter, corporate asset, was fully restored. Almost. Because late that night, alone in her pristine bedroom with its designer furniture and silk sheets, Elena could still feel the ghost of Jack's kiss on her lips, could still hear Emma's laughter, could still remember what it felt like to be loved for exactly who she was. And she knew with a certainty that terrified her. This wasn't over. It couldn't be over. Because you can't put someone back in a cage once they've tasted freedom. The days that followed blurred together into gray monotony that felt like drowning in slow motion. The penthouse was exactly as she'd left it, spotless, temperature-controlled, decorated with art that cost more than most people made in a year. It was a museum, not a home, and Elena moved through it like a ghost haunting her own life. Richard had immediately reinstated her position at Castellano Holdings, putting her back in her corner office with its panoramic views of downtown Minneapolis. Her assistant, Caroline, had welcomed her back with carefully neutral professionalism, asking no questions about where she'd been or why she'd left. The corporate machine simply absorbed her return as if the 6 weeks of her absence had been nothing more than an extended vacation. But Elena wasn't the same woman who'd run away. She sat through board meetings discussing quarterly earnings and market expansion, and all she could think about was Jack, working night shifts to keep his electricity on. She attended business lunches at restaurants where a single meal cost what he made in a day, and she couldn't taste the food. She wore designer suits that cost thousands of dollars and felt like costumes, remembering how right she'd felt in borrowed sweatpants and an old t-shirt. 3 days after her return, she had lunch with Marcus Ashford at his club. All dark wood and leather chairs and men in expensive suits making deals over scotch. It was their third date since her return, orchestrated by their fathers to help them reconnect before the wedding. Marcus was handsome, in the way wealthy men often were, well-groomed, fit from personal trainers, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He wasn't cruel exactly, just empty, like a perfectly rendered portrait with no life behind the eyes. "You seem distracted. That little episode of yours had people talking." Elena tasted the word, bitter on her tongue. "Episode? Is that what we're calling it? What would you prefer? Breakdown? Crisis? Running away like a child?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Whatever it was, it's over now. You're back where you belong." Elena looked at this man who was supposed to be her future husband and felt absolutely nothing.
No attraction, no warmth, no connection. Just the cold calculation of a business merger disguised as a marriage. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you actually want to marry me? Not as a business arrangement, but as people. Do you want me? He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Want is an interesting word. I think we're well suited. Compatible goals, similar backgrounds. We'll make a formidable team. That's not what I asked. Marcus set down his fork, regarding her with what might have been patience in someone with actual empathy. Elena, what you're really asking is whether this is some grand romance. And the answer is no. Of course not.
We're adults. We understand that successful marriages are built on partnership and mutual benefit, not some fantasy of love conquering all. Elena thought about Jack's calloused hands carefully bandaging her blisters, about Emma's laughter filling a tiny kitchen, about falling asleep on a sagging couch and feeling more content than she ever had in silk sheets.
What if I want the fantasy?
Then you're being naive. Love fades. Chemistry burns out. But a solid foundation of shared interests and financial security? That lasts. 2 weeks later, Marcus Ashford requested a private dinner. Not at his club this time, but at a small Italian restaurant tucked away from the usual power player haunts. Elena went, curious about the change in venue, wondering if maybe there was more to him than she'd seen. They were seated in a quiet corner booth when Marcus leaned forward, his usual polished demeanor cracking slightly.
I need to tell you something before we go any further with this charade. Elena's pulse quickened. Okay. I'm gay. Have been my whole life. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Elena felt shock ripple through her, followed quickly by understanding. All those empty conversations, the lack of chemistry, the way he'd never really looked at her. My father knows, doesn't care, thinks I can just manage it discreetly while maintaining the appearance of a proper marriage. When he suggested I marry you, I agreed because it solved problems. You'd get the life you were raised for, I'd get the cover I needed, and both our fathers would get their business merger. Elena reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I had no idea. I'm so sorry you have to hide. It's the world we live in. But watching you these past weeks, willing to give up everything for actual love, it made me realize how much I've compromised, how much I've let my father's expectations dictate my life. Marcus's jaw set with determination she'd never seen before. I'm not going to marry you. I'm breaking the engagement. My father is furious, but I don't care anymore. I'd rather be authentic and struggle than continue living a lie. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. You inspired me. If you can walk away from all that money and power, I can walk away from my father's expectations. They talked for hours after that. Two people trapped in gilded cages recognizing each other's pain. Marcus offered help, references outside Richard's network, introductions to companies that valued competence over politics. Consider it my apology for being complicit in your imprisonment, even if unknowingly. When Elena returned to the penthouse that night, she found her father waiting in his study. He looked up from his papers with cold fury. Marcus Ashford just called. He's ending the engagement. Care to explain? He's gay, Father. He's been hiding it his whole life, and he's done pretending. I don't blame him. Richard's face went purple. Do you have any idea what this does to our arrangement with Ashford Industries? Do you have any idea how much political capital I've spent on this merger? I don't care about your merger. I don't care about your political capital. I care about not spending the rest of my life in a sham marriage. You will find that caring doesn't pay bills or maintain your lifestyle. Without this marriage, you have nothing. The trust fund doesn't unlock until you're 25. The inheritance is tied to establishing a proper household, which requires a suitable marriage. Elena stood, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Then I'll have nothing. I've lived with nothing. I survived. I was happy. You were playing house with a nobody. That's not surviving. That's delusion. Something in Elena snapped. All the careful control she'd maintained since her return, all the polite compliance, shattered like glass. That nobody is worth 10 of you. That nobody took in a stranger without asking for anything in return. That nobody works himself to exhaustion to give his daughter a good life. That nobody has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Richard stood too, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You will not speak to me that way. But Elena was done. Years of being the perfect daughter, of swallowing her opinions, of bending to his will, it all came pouring out. Why not? What are you going to do? Cut me off? Threaten me? You've already taken everything that mattered. I have nothing left to lose. She was shouting now, not caring that Caroline could probably hear from her room, not caring that this was burning every bridge. You want to know why I ran? Because you've controlled every aspect of my life since Mom died.
My education, my career, my friends, my future husband. When was I supposed to become my own person? When was I supposed to figure out what I actually want? What you want is irrelevant. You're a Castellano. You have responsibilities. I'm a person, a human being with thoughts and feelings and dreams that don't involve quarterly reports and strategic mergers. The words kept coming, everything she'd held back for 23 years. Did you ever love Mom? Really love her? Or was that a merger too? Richard's face went carefully blank, the way it always did when emotions threatened to surface. Your mother was an excellent partner. We built a good life together. That's not what I asked. And you know what? I already know the answer. Mom was miserable. I saw it even if you didn't. She smiled at parties and galas, but at home, she was empty, just going through the motions. And then she got sick, and suddenly it was too late for her to ever be anything else. That's enough. Is it? Because I'm starting to think it's not nearly enough. I'm starting to think we should have talked about this years ago, before you started planning out my entire life like it was a corporate strategy. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard stared at his daughter like he'd never seen her before, like she'd become something incomprehensible. Get out of my study. Gladly. Elena slammed the door behind her, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd finally said everything she'd been too scared to say. And now she'd face the consequences. They came swiftly. Within an hour, her company credit cards were deactivated. Her office access was revoked. Her position was suspended pending review. Richard didn't speak to her for 3 days. And when he finally did, it was through his lawyer. Miss Castellano, your father wants you to understand that your future with Castellano Holdings and your access to family resources depends on your willingness to reconsider your position. Elena told the lawyer exactly what her father could do with his position. Alone in her room that night, Elena pulled out the burner phone she'd bought with the last of her cash. She'd been careful,
paranoid even, knowing her father monitored everything. She found a lawyer 3 states away, someone with no connections to Richard's network. His name was David Sullivan, an independent attorney in Madison, Wisconsin, who specialized in complex inheritance cases. Miss Castellano, I'll be honest. Taking on your father is a huge risk. He has resources to drag this out for years. Elena's voice was steady. I don't have money now, but if we win, if I get access to my mother's inheritance, you'll get 20%. That's close to $4 million. Sullivan was quiet for a moment.
That's a hell of a gamble. I already have nothing. At least this way I'm fighting for something. They began building a case, arguing that her mother's inheritance, specified in Isabella Castellano's will as money for establishing a household, should be Elena's independent property, not controlled through a marriage Richard approved of. But then Sullivan found something else, buried in the trust documents. There's an emergency medical provision. Your mother set it up after her cancer battle. You can access up to $100,000 if an immediate family member has a documented medical emergency. Elena's heart raced. But I don't have any immediate family except my father. The provision defines immediate family broadly, including legal dependents or guardianship petitions in process. It was a lifeline, but one she couldn't use. Not unless something terrible happened. 3 weeks before the scheduled wedding date, the wedding to Marcus Ashford that was no longer happening, but that Richard refused to cancel as if sheer stubbornness could resurrect his plans, Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. Her hand shook as she answered.
Miss Castellano, this is Nurse Morrison from Cedar Falls Community Hospital.
Elena's world tilted.
We have a young girl here, Emma Morrison. She was admitted this morning with severe sepsis. She's been asking for you. Says you're... The nurse checked her notes. Says you're like her mom. The phone nearly slipped from Elena's hands. What's wrong with her? Is she okay? She has sepsis from an untreated infection. We've started her on antibiotics, but she needs to be transferred to a larger facility. The problem is... The nurse's voice went heavy. Mr. Morrison doesn't have insurance. He can't afford the $40,000 deposit for transfer to Minneapolis Children's Hospital.
Elena was already moving, grabbing her keys, her wallet, not bothering to change out of the designer dress she was wearing. I'm coming right now. Don't do anything. Don't discharge her. Tell them I'm covering it, all of it, everything she needs. I'm on my way. She flew down to the parking garage, got in her Mercedes, and broke every speed limit between Minneapolis and Cedar Falls. The 2-hour drive felt like an eternity. Her mind conjured worst-case scenarios. Emma's bright smile gone forever. Jack losing his daughter because he couldn't afford to save her. Both of them hating Elena for leaving, for not being there when they needed her most. She burst into the emergency room, still in her expensive dress and heels, completely out of place in the small-town facility. Emma Morrison, where is she? Room 4. Elena pushed through the door to find Jack sitting beside a hospital bed, his head in his hands. Emma lay there, so small and pale against the white sheets, IVs running into her thin arms. She looked like a ghost of the vibrant child Elena remembered. Jack. He looked up, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like he'd aged years in the 3 weeks since she'd left. Elena. God, Elena. I didn't know who else to call. I didn't want to drag you back into this, but she kept asking for you. And I couldn't. I can't. His voice broke, and Elena crossed the room in 3 strides, wrapping her arms around him. Jack buried his face in her shoulder, his whole body shaking with the desperate fear of a parent watching his child suffer. It's okay. I've got it.
I've got all of it. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not this time.
Emma stirred on the hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open, glassy with fever, but focusing on Elena with recognition that made the world stop spinning for just a moment.
You came back. I knew you would.
I told Daddy you'd come if we needed you. Elena moved to the bedside, taking Emma's small hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines threading into her pale skin.
Of course I came back. I love you, sweetheart. Both of you. And we're going to get you better. The best doctors, the best hospital, whatever you need. Promise? I promise.
Elena left Jack with Emma and hunted down whoever was in charge. She found the hospital administrator in a cluttered office that spoke of underfunding and overwork, the reality of rural healthcare in America. I need to speak to whoever handles billing and transfers. Now! 20 minutes and several phone calls later, Elena had arranged Emma's immediate transfer to Minneapolis Children's Hospital. She pulled out the credit card she'd kept hidden from her father, the one from her mother's separate trust, set up when Elena was 18, before Isabella died. Richard didn't know about it because it had never mattered before. Just another piece of plastic gathering dust. Bill everything to me. Every procedure, every medication, every night in the hospital. Mr. Morrison is not to receive a single bill. The administrator looked at the name on the card, recognition flickering. Castellano? As in Richard Castellano? That's right. My father's lawyers will probably call within the hour trying to cancel the charges. When they do, you tell them this is my card, my decision, and I'm an adult who can incur my own debts. If they have a problem with that, they can sue me. The card had a $50,000 limit, enough to cover the initial transfer and buy them time. Elena would need to access her mother's emergency provision for the rest, but first Emma had to be stable, had to be safe. The ambulance ride back to Minneapolis was surreal. Elena sat beside Emma's gurney, holding her hand, while Jack followed in his truck. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time her eyes opened, they sought Elena like a lifeline. Minneapolis Children's Hospital was everything Cedar Falls wasn't. State-of-the-art equipment, specialists on call, private rooms that looked more like hotel suites than medical facilities. Money bought miracles here, or at least bought access to the people who could perform them. A team of specialists descended on Emma the moment they arrived, whisking her away for tests and treatment. Elena and Jack were left in a private waiting room with furniture that cost more per piece than Jack's entire living room set. Jack kept looking around like he'd stumbled into the wrong universe. This is crazy. People like me don't get treatment in places like this. They do now. Elena poured them both coffee, real coffee from actual beans, not the instant kind Jack kept in his kitchen. Because Emma deserves the best. And so do you. I can't let you pay for all this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. And anyway, it's my money, my choice. My father might control my trust fund and inheritance, but this card is mine alone. Never used it much. What's the point when everything's already provided? But I've been building credit for years. The limit is high enough to cover Emma's treatment, at least initially. Jack's voice dropped, rough with emotion. When your father finds out, then he finds out. I'm done living in fear of his disapproval. I'm done pretending his version of my life is the only option. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Jack looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the exact instant when he stopped arguing, when he let himself believe that maybe they could actually make this work. The wedding. It's in 3 weeks. There's not going to be a wedding. Marcus broke the engagement. He's gay, Jack. The whole thing was a sham.
I already have a lawyer working on getting me access to my mother's inheritance.
Once I have that money, I'll be financially independent. My father won't be able to control me anymore. She moved closer, taking both of Jack's hands.
I'm in love with you. Completely, impossibly, irrationally in love with you. I know it's crazy. We've only known each other a few months, and those months were hardly normal circumstances. But I've never been more certain of anything. Jack pulled her close, and Elena sank into his embrace, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. I love you too. But Elena, you need to understand what you're giving up. Your father's not going to just let this go. He's going to fight you with everything he has. Let him. I'm not the scared girl who ran away anymore. I'm the woman who worked at a laundromat, who learned to fight for what she wants, who found out she's stronger than anyone gave her credit for, including myself. Around midnight, a doctor emerged with news that felt like oxygen after drowning. Emma's fever had broken.
The antibiotics were working. She'd need to stay hospitalized for several days, but her prognosis was excellent. She's asking for both of you. The doctor smiled knowingly. She won't sleep until she sees her parents. Neither Elena nor Jack corrected the assumption. They found Emma in a private room that looked nothing like a hospital. Soft lighting, a flat-screen TV, a bed with controls that made it rise and fall at the touch of a button.
Daddy! Elena! They have video games here, and the bed goes up and down.
Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the looming confrontation with Richard, they both laughed. This was Emma, finding joy in automatic beds and entertainment systems even while recovering from sepsis. Elena's phone rang at 1 a.m. Her father's name lit up the screen like a warning flare. She stepped into the hallway, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello, Father.
What the hell do you think you're doing? I just got a call from the hospital about charges on your credit card. $40,000 for some child's medical treatment. Have you lost your mind?
No. For the first time in my life, I think I found it. You will reverse those charges immediately. You will come home. You will finish preparing for your wedding. This nonsense ends now. You're right about one thing. It does end now. But not the way you think. I'm not coming home. I'm not marrying Marcus. He already broke the engagement. And I'm not letting you control my life anymore. Richard's voice went cold, the tone he used when closing business deals that destroyed competitors. If you do this, you're cut off completely. No money, no position, no inheritance. You'll have nothing. I'll have everything that matters. Love, family, freedom. Things you've never understood the value of. You're making a mistake that will ruin your life. Maybe, but it'll be my mistake to make. My life to ruin or build as I see fit. I'm done living your version of my story, Dad. It's time I wrote my own. Elena ended the call before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding, but underneath the fear was something else. Exhilaration, liberation, the terrifying and wonderful freedom of finally taking control of her own destiny. The next 4 days passed in a blur of medical updates and quiet moments. Emma grew stronger with each passing hour, the color returning to her cheeks, her laughter filling the sterile hospital room. Elena and Jack took turns staying with her, though more often than not, they were both there, unwilling to leave her side or each other's. The bills kept mounting, $15,000, $25,000, $40,000, $60,000. By the time Emma was discharged, the total came to $87,347.23.
Elena's credit card maxed out at $50,000. The remaining $37,000 would need to come from her mother's emergency provision.
if David Sullivan could convince a judge to release it. The provision requires documented medical emergency affecting immediate family, Sullivan explained over the phone. We'll argue that Emma qualifies. You're filing for guardianship, establishing a household together. It's not a sure thing, but given your mother's clear intent and Emma's documented condition, we've got a strong case. How long? 2 to 3 weeks, maybe less. Judges tend to move quickly on medical emergency petitions. They drove back to Cedar Falls in Jack's truck. Elena's Mercedes stayed in Minneapolis, too conspicuous for the life she was choosing. Emma sat between them, chattering about everything she'd tell her friends at school, still finding magic in the memory of video games and beds that moved on their own. Jack's house looked even more run down than Elena remembered. Porch sagging ominously, paint peeling in sheets. But lights glowed warm in the windows, and Margaret O'Brien was on her own porch, waving when she saw them pull up. This was home now. Not a penthouse 40 stories above the city, but this small, broken house with its thrift store furniture and patched walls. And Elena had never been more certain of anything. It's not much, Jack started, the old embarrassment creeping into his voice. It's perfect. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Elena found work at Cedar Falls Community Services, a nonprofit helping low-income families navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of social services. The director, Janet Rodriguez, hired her despite Richard Castellano's phone call attempting to poison the well. Your father called, tried to convince me you were unstable. Anyone Richard Castellano hates that much is probably doing something right. Plus, you've got empathy these families need. You've been there. The job paid $32,000 a year, a fraction of what Elena would have made at Castellano Holdings. But it was honest work that mattered. Every family she helped reminded her why she'd made the choice she did. Jack continued his night shifts, adding extra hours to try to offset the mounting debt. Elena insisted on contributing equally to household expenses, pooling what little money they both had. Margaret still watched Emma, though now she refused payment, declaring that they were family, and family didn't charge. 3 weeks after Emma's hospitalization, David Sullivan called with news that felt like a reprieve from execution. The court approved the emergency release. Judge reviewed Emma's medical records, your guardianship petition, and your mother's clear intent. Richard's lawyers tried to block it, arguing you manipulated the situation, but the judge shut them down. Said you acted to save a child's life. That's exactly what the emergency provision was for. $100,000. Not a fortune, but it was freedom. Elena could clear the hospital debt, pay off her credit card, and have enough left over to establish a real safety net. That evening, she and Jack sat on the porch, newly reinforced, no longer sagging, and talked about the future. What do you want to do with it? Jack's voice was careful, like he was afraid the wrong word might shatter this fragile new reality. Elena had been thinking about this since Sullivan's call. I want to invest most of it. Safe, boring investments for long-term security. But some of it, I want to use now, for things that matter. Like what? Like fixing this house properly, setting up a college fund for Emma, buying you a truck that doesn't break down twice a month, and maybe, she paused, letting the idea take shape, maybe starting something of our own. A business, something we build together. Jack turned to look at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. What kind of business? Remember how you said you always wanted to open a restaurant? What if we did that? Not a fancy place, something simple, comfort food, honest prices, a place where people like us can afford to eat. We could call it Morrison's Table. Make it a real family business. Elena, running a restaurant is incredibly risky. Most fail in the first year. We'd be gambling everything we have. So was running away from my father. So was falling in love with you.
So was every good decision I've ever made. I'm kind of done playing it safe.
Jack laughed, pulling her closer. You're crazy, you know that?
Crazy about you. Is there a difference?
They spent the next several months planning. Elena kept her job at community services. The work mattered too much to abandon, but nights and weekends were devoted to building their dream. They found a small storefront near the park, formerly a failed coffee shop. The rent was $1,200 a month, manageable if they were careful. They had $8,000 from the trust fund after clearing debts. They needed at least $50,000 more for equipment, licenses, initial inventory, and working capital. The bank wouldn't loan to them. Elena's credit was good, but she had no employment history that mattered, and Jack's income was too low, too unstable. So they turned to the community. Carl Murphy invested $5,000. Janet Rodriguez put in $3,000. Margaret O'Brien contributed $2,000 from her late husband's life insurance. 10 other Cedar Falls residents invested between $500 and $2,000 each. Total raised, $25,000. They took out a small business loan for $20,000 more. High interest rate, but they qualified based on the community investment and collateral of potential inheritance. Total capital, $53,000. Enough to open, if they were smart and careful, and willing to do most of the work themselves. The renovation took 3 months of back-breaking labor. Jack and Elena worked side by side, stripping the old coffee shop down to studs, installing fixtures, painting walls. Carl helped with plumbing. Margaret sewed curtains. Janet connected them with out-of-work contractors willing to trade services for future meals. Emma appointed herself official greeter and quality control tester for desserts. Someone has to make sure the brownies are good enough. It's an important job. They furnished the space with mismatched tables from thrift stores, painted the walls by hand, made menus on chalkboards that Emma decorated with drawings. It was nothing like the elegant restaurants Elena had grown up dining in. It was better. 6 months after Emma's hospitalization, on a cold February morning, they stood in Morrison's table, ready to open for the first time. Elena wore an apron over jeans, her hair pulled back, her hands rough from work. Jack stood beside her in the kitchen, ready to cook his mother's recipes. Emma waited by the door, bouncing with excitement to greet their first customers. You ready? Jack's voice held equal parts terror and exhilaration. Terrified. What if no one comes? What if the food's terrible? What if we've made a huge mistake? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. They opened the doors at 11 a.m. People came, not a flood, but a steady stream. Folks from town who'd watched them work on the space, who'd known Jack for years, who were curious about the former heiress who'd given up everything for love. The food was good, the prices fair, the atmosphere warm. By closing time at 7 p.m., they were exhausted but exhilarated. They'd made enough to cover expenses with a small profit, not a fortune, but honest money earned through their own efforts. We did it! Elena collapsed into a chair while Emma cleaned tables with more enthusiasm than effectiveness. We did. And we'll do it again tomorrow and the day after that, until we can't anymore, or until we build something sustainable. Either way, we do it together. But building something sustainable required more than hope and hard work. It required confronting the past that kept reaching forward with sharp claws. The past arrived on a gray March afternoon in the form of Richard Castellano's town car pulling up outside Morrison's table. Elena saw it through the window and felt her stomach drop. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Her father wasn't the type to let things go. He stepped out looking older than she remembered, more tired. He wore casual slacks and a sweater instead of his usual power suit. When he walked into the restaurant, he looked around with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Hello, Elena. May I come in? You're already in. May I sit then? Elena gestured to a booth, her heart hammering. She expected anger, threats,
one more attempt to drag her back to Minneapolis. Instead, Richard just looked at the restaurant, the mismatched chairs, the hand-painted walls, the drawings Emma had made. It's not much, but it's remarkable. Richard's voice was quiet, almost wondering. You did this. Built this from nothing. With Jack and Emma and a lot of people from this town who believed in us. Richard nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what you said, about control and cages and all of it. Your mother used to say the same things before she got sick. She'd tell me I was so focused on building legacies that I forgot to build a life. He looked up, meeting Elena's eyes directly for the first time. She was right. And so were you.
Elena felt tears burn but refused to let them fall.
Why are you telling me this now?
Because I'm 58 years old, and I'm tired. I don't want to die alone, having never really known my daughter. Having never met my... He paused, swallowing hard. Having never met Emma. Her name is Emma, and she is my daughter in every way that matters. I'd like to meet her, if you'd allow it. I'd like to try to be something. Maybe not the father I should have been, but something better than the one I was. Elena studied her father, really studied him, for the first time in years. She saw past the tyrant to the scared, lonely person underneath. He'd made terrible choices, but so had she before learning better. Maybe everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Okay, but we do this on my terms now. You come as a guest, not a king. You don't criticize our choices or try to buy your way into our lives. And if you ever try to control me or my family again, you're out permanently.
No second chances. I understand. Emma was cautious when Elena introduced them. This 10-year-old who knew her mother had come from somewhere complicated but didn't quite understand the details. Are you really Elena's dad? The one who lives in the tall building? I am. I'm sorry I haven't been around before. I've made some mistakes. Emma considered this with the seriousness only a child could muster. It's okay. Grown-ups make mistakes sometimes. That's what Elena always says. The important thing is you try to fix them. Richard's eyes were bright when he looked at Elena. She's right. And I'm trying to fix them, if you'll let me. The reconciliation was slow, imperfect. Richard came to dinner once a month, stilted and uncomfortable at first in their small house, slowly learning how to be a grandfather and father instead of a CEO. He and Jack developed a wary respect, two men from different worlds, united by love for the same woman.
In month 8, Richard offered to invest $50,000 in Morrison's table. Fair terms, no control, just capital for expansion. Elena was hesitant, but Jack pointed out they could use it for a second location, for growing into something more sustainable. They accepted with clear terms. Richard was a silent partner, no management decisions. He honored the boundaries. The restaurant grew steadily, not wildly profitable, but sustainable. They built a reputation for honest food at honest prices, for being the kind of place where everyone felt welcome. Elena still worked part-time at community services. Jack ran the kitchen full-time. Emma was their official greeter and, as she got older, learned to work the register and help with prep. In year 2, they bought the building. In year 3, they expanded seating and hired more staff. Elena went back to school online, finishing her degree in art history, not for career advancement, just because she could, because it made her happy. Jack compiled his mother's recipes into a self-published cookbook that sold modestly but steadily, building a small cult following. 4 years after that rainy night in October, on a spring evening when Emma was 11 and everything felt possible, Jack asked Elena to marry him. Not with an elaborate production, but simply on their porch where they'd first admitted they loved each other. The ring was modest, all he could afford, but Elena treasured it more than any jewelry her father had ever bought her. "I know I should have asked sooner. I know we're basically already married in every way that matters, but I wanted to make it official. Wanted you to have my name if you wanted. Wanted Emma to know for certain that we're a family forever." "Yes, absolutely yes. I've been waiting for you to ask." Elena had a surprise of her own.
But I have something to tell you first. Jack's face went cautious. Okay. I'm pregnant. Jack dropped the ring box. When? About 10 weeks. I found out last week, was trying to figure out how to tell you. He swept her up, spinning her around, both of them crying and laughing and kissing. Emma came running out, demanding to know what was happening, and when they told her, she shrieked with joy loud enough to wake the neighborhood. They married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at Morrison's table, surrounded by Cedar Falls friends and community services family and the investors who'd believed in them. Richard walked Elena down the aisle, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding what his daughter had been trying to tell him all along. The vows were simple, written by them. Elena's voice was steady. "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a home when I was lost. You loved me when I was nobody." Jack's response came thick with emotion. "You brought light into our lives. You made our house a home. You showed me that family is chosen, not just given." The reception was at the restaurant, food they'd cooked themselves, local band playing for tips. Emma was flower girl, taking her duties seriously, distributing every petal with precision. Richard danced stiffly with his daughter, trying so hard to be present. "You were right about all of it. I'd built an empire and lost everything that mattered. I'm glad you had the courage I didn't." "It's not too late for you either, Dad. You could retire. Find something that makes you happy instead of just successful." "I've been thinking about it. There's a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, teaching them how to build businesses ethically. Use what I've learned for something good." "I think that sounds perfect." Late that summer, Isabella Marie Morrison was born at 3:47 in the morning, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. They named her after Elena's mother, with Marie for Jack's mother. Emma was beside herself with joy at being a big sister. Richard met his granddaughter with tears streaming down his face, seeing the continuation of family he'd almost destroyed through his need for control. 6 months after Isabella's birth, Elena received a letter on expensive stationery with the Castellano Holdings logo. Richard was stepping down as CEO after 35 years. He wanted Elena to consider joining the company, not as his puppet, but as an independent board member. "I've restructured everything. The board has real power now. I've stepped back. If you're interested, I'd like you to consider it. No pressure. Your choice." The salary was $200,000 a year, part-time, 2 days a week in Minneapolis. It would solve financial pressures immediately, give them security they'd been building towards slowly. Elena and Jack discussed it late at night, Isabella sleeping between them. "It's your choice. I'll support whatever you decide." "Would it feel like going backward?" "Only if you let it. You're not the same person who ran away. You've proven you can build something from nothing. A corporate board can't change that." Elena realized something. She wasn't afraid of that world anymore. She'd conquered it by leaving. Now she could engage with it on her own terms. She accepted, with conditions. She maintained her nonprofit work, stayed involved with the restaurant,
and family came first, always. Richard agreed without hesitation. On a Sunday morning, a year after Isabella's birth, Elena stood in Morrison's table, watching her family. Jack cooked while Emma entertained her baby sister. Richard sat at a corner table, chatting with Carl and Margaret like a regular. Janet brought her kids in for brunch. The restaurant filled with laughter and conversation and the smell of coffee and comfort food. Jack came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. No regrets? The question he'd asked 100 times over the years. Elena looked around at the small restaurant, the imperfect life, the beautiful family. She thought about everything she'd given up, wealth, status, security. She thought about everything she'd gained, love, purpose, freedom, authenticity. Not a single one. Best decision I ever made. Running away in the rain? Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd changed everything by offering kindness when she needed it most. No. Walking through your door and deciding to stay. They kissed while Emma made exaggerated gagging noises and Isabella giggled in her high chair. Customers started arriving for the Sunday brunch rush, their busiest time of the week. Elena tied on her apron, kissed her family, and got to work. This moment, imperfect, chaotic, real, was everything she'd ever needed. In the end, Elena hadn't just escaped her cage. She'd learned to fly. And the view from here, from this simple and complicated and beautiful life they'd built together, was better than anything she'd seen from her father's tower. The richest life wasn't measured in dollars or status or power. It was measured in moments like these, in burnt pancakes and blistered hands and love given freely. In family built by choice rather than blood. In home found not in penthouses, but in small houses with reinforced porches and warm lights. In choosing love over fear again and again, until choosing love became as natural as breathing. Elena had run through the rain searching for shelter. What she found was so much more. She found herself. And in finding herself, she found everything that truly mattered. The morning rush picked up, and Elena moved through the restaurant with practiced ease, refilling coffee, chatting with regulars, making sure every person who walked through their door felt welcome. Jack's cooking filled the air with scents that reminded people of home, of mothers and grandmothers, and kitchens where love was the secret ingredient. Emma was showing Isabella off to anyone who'd look, proud big sister written all over her face. Richard sat quietly in his corner, watching his daughter move through the life she'd chosen, finally understanding that the empire he'd built meant nothing compared to the family she'd created. Outside, Cedar Falls went about its Sunday morning. The town that had seemed like an escape, like a hiding place, had become home. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because the people here valued you for what you did, not who your father was. And that, Elena had learned, was worth more than all the money in the world.